Hello, and welcome back to the Battle Frontier podcast, where we aim to help you level up in your journey as a competitive Pokemon TCG player. I'm Aaron Curry. Here with me, as always, is my co-host John Orgel. John, how are you doing this week?
Hey guys, I'm doing good. We had our league challenge last night, and we had a familiar foe take it down. Johnny Ravis came back from after he beat me in the League Cup the week before, but he went undefeated in our challenge, 4-0 with same deck Raging Bolt. So it's cool to see that, and it'd be cool. I know Johnny's going to Louisville, so it'd be cool to kind of follow his progress as he plays in the event. So, but yeah, had a good week. How about you?
Not a ton of in-person Pokemon, unfortunately. Work kept me busy on our league night here on Friday, and just got out of there too late to really head to the shop. And this week have been preoccupied with Hurricane prep, unfortunately. But I still have been jamming some TCG live games. Had time to get in some Terrapagos gameplay, along with some testing of Ryuki's Dragapult Dusknoir list from Dortmund. And honestly, I mean, I can't say anything that anybody's really going to be surprised by. Both of those decks are strong. And I feel like if you're not playing Dusknoir right now, you better have a good reason not to.
For sure. Yeah, no, I can see that. And we'll get into that later on in the episode. But yeah, great. It can be tough. I know, and I hope you guys in Florida are gearing up, and I know you are. But I hope everybody's y'all are all in my thoughts this week as we get into Louisville. You know, just the realities of that situation are gonna be really tough.
For sure.
So,
and I'll speak for all Floridians and say thank you for those thoughts. Hope everyone from Florida that was intending to head to Louisville managed to get there safely. Or if you did not get to attend the event, realize that it's not the end of the world. Your life, your safety is more important than that. Make sure you're taking care of yourself. But with that being said, we're going to jump into our first segment for the week, and it is my turn to host Blaine's Quiz Show. So, John, here I've got for you my souped-up version of Blaine's Quiz Show.
Look at the graphic. I'm sorry for all the audio listeners. This has got like an 80s retro vibe to it.
For sure. Actually, with that being said, for anyone that is listening on Spotify or whatever podcasting platform you listen on, we do post the show on YouTube on the Camp Legend Network YouTube channel. That's Camp Legend Network, or you should be able to search the show's name, Battle Frontier Podcast, and it should come up for you. If you do wish to follow along visually as well as auditorily. But, John, we've got our quiz show set up for you, and we're going to first talk about how the quiz show works. So for those of you who didn't listen last week, the quiz show is structured as a set of 3 questions. As we're kind of easing into things, everything has been multiple choice so far. At some point, we may make them a little bit more difficult than that, but there will be 3 questions. I've tried to order them in terms of increasing difficulty, and for each correct answer that John gets, he will get 1 point. Last week's results led to me having a current lead of 2-0. We'll see if John can overtake me.
All right,
so, John, your first question: which of these 4 archetypes has earned the most championship points in the modern Pokemon TCG? Your choices are Zoroark GX, Arceus V-Star, Lugia V-Star, or Mew Genesect.
This is a tougher one than I think it, because Mew came out, like my first gut reaction is to say Mew Genesect, but it came out during the pandemic. There wasn't a lot of organized play, so I didn't get the full play experience. I really don't think it's Arceus. I know that it had a lot of good finishes, and I think it's between Zoroark and Lugia here. And I think Lugia, Broken Lugia, was super, super good, but it really got hit pretty hard after rotation. And it's been solid. We've seen a Roll come through with a couple good finishes, but I'm going to have to give it to Zoroark. Zoroark just such a dominant factor in the Sun and Moon era. I think it has to be Zoroark GX. It just had that 5-year run, or not 5-year, 4-year run, 3-year run. However long Pokemon cards are in play. Sorry.
No, you're good.
From when it was printed to basically till it rotated, it was in top 8s every time. So my answer is Zoroark, locking it in.
Okay. I think your logical path is sound, and you may be correct if we had a modified or adjusted championship point structure to compensate for modern championship point values. But the correct answer to this question was, in fact, Lugia V-Star.
Ooh.
So as you said, Broken Lugia.
It's supposed to be the easiest
Broken
question,
Lugia was pretty broken. You're right. Maybe this is not the easiest question out there. I just assumed
right.
that an astute judge of your caliber would have been able to walk me through this question. But we can go ahead and move on to question number
Oh
two.
man, don't even put
So
that
for
on
question
me.
number two, this one may be a little bit more difficult, especially for somebody that wasn't necessarily playing back in this era of the
Oh
game.
my
But all but one of the following was a quote secret deck that Jimmy Ballard played a role in developing. But I need you to tell me which of these four is the imposter. And your choices are
God.
Ambush, Destiny, Storm, and Sausage.
Okay, so I started playing in 2011, and I like you hear of players passed down from Legend of War. Jimmy Ballard's obviously one of those. I know of a couple of his decks that he played. I know he played like the Espeon deck, um, but I don't know the names. This is like so hard for me. Um, I'm really shooting in the dark here, so I'm just gonna try to like think through your process as a quiz maker here. I think sausage is just like too out in left field to not be true. Um, so storm, ambush, and destiny. I don't know, man. I don't have anything even remotely close to a line of logic with this. Let's just.
Okay, I'll throw you a bone real quick. I will give you a lifeline of sorts. I will let you select one of these archetype, or not archetype, one of these deck names, and I will tell you which Pokemon were the key players in that deck.
Okay. Let's go with
Okay,
storm.
Storm would be Lugia, Blastoise, and Steelix.
LBS. Okay. Uh, I don't know if he did LBS. I'm gonna lock in Storm. I think that's. I don't feel confident enough to say that he was the guy behind that. I think that was pretty common at that point. I don't think he could be a secret. It wouldn't be a secret deck in my
Sure.
mind.
And you are actually correct. Storm was the one that was meant to be in
What?
here to kind of trip you up. Um, there was actually a little bit of there's lore background for this question. Storm was
Hmm.
the quote alternate deck name assigned to LBS by Ross Coffin because the deck was originally
Okay.
constructed down in Florida by Eric Craig, and then simultaneously Ross developed the deck up in the Northwest with an alternate name. But to walk you through some of Jimmy's other decks here, we have Ambush from 2007, which was the Empoleon Delta Marowak deck. That was the surprise for
I have no
U.S.
idea what that is.
Nationals. Destiny has become a very strong contender in the Ruby Sapphire through Power Keepers format for people that play retro. That is focused on the Delta Rayquaza EX and just a toolbox of some other attackers, including Delta Lickitung and some things to just try to control the board of your opponent while you kind of pick it apart. And as you correctly called out, Sausage is just a weird name that Jimmy gave to Bennett Blissey in 2008. I have no idea why he chose that name, but at the same time, it was weird to include this one. It was just a funny name, but it was also not really a secret deck at that time because it had been played as an archetype throughout the year prior to this. Yeah, maybe I made these questions a little bit too hard this week.
I don't know, man. I'm 1-1, and it doesn't feel like I earned either one. I don't feel like I earned that victory, but we'll take it. We'll.
So we're going to follow this up with this week's stage 2 question.
Oh
And
no.
this one's a little bit less competitively focused, but which of the following popular Pokemon has not been printed as every type of two prizer? So that would be EX, EX, GX, or EX. And I know that sounds very confusing in an auditory format, but you have lowercase EX, all uppercase EX, GX, and then the modern, I guess, slightly italicized EX.
Mm-hmm.
And your choices are Greninja,
So
Charizard, Gardevoir, and Gengar.
so my first gut reaction is Greninja. It's just not old enough. It's a black and white card, so I don't think it was in the first series of EXs. But I'm trying to remember it because what I'm thinking is that might be like a red herring with I know for the 25th anniversary set, they re-released a bunch of Pokemon.
Sure.
Like they had a Mimikyu Delta species, I
Mm-hmm.
think, or something like that. So I'm wondering if Greninja got a reprint. But I know Greninja Star exists. It's a shiny like version of Greninja that got printed in the 25th anniversary. And I don't think they would do two different versions of Greninja in that 25th anniversary set. So I'm going to lock in Greninja as my
Okay,
answer.
and John, you are absolutely correct. Greninja is indeed too new of a Pokemon to be a lowercase EX. Initially, I had this as the basic question, but then for some reason I thought that it may be a little bit more difficult than it initially appeared. But, good job.
Well, that makes me feel a little bit better after the horrendous start.
So we will be
So
sitting tied at 2-2, and I will look forward to your questions heading into next week.
yeah, I'm gonna pull out some more 2016 trivia
And
for you. I know how much
I
you
will
love
get
that.
all of them wrong.
So. It's only fair after you hit me up with the 2006, 2008
Okay,
trivia.
yeah, you're
So
right. You're right. My bad. Maybe those questions were a little
no,
unfair,
it's
but
fine. It's good. It's pushing me. It's challenging me. It's what we're here to do. We're here to challenge listeners and casters alike. So I love it.
absolutely. And speaking of challenging people, this past weekend, several hundred people gathered to challenge each other down in Lima, Peru, for the Lima Special Event. And although a lot of the results from that event are not fully public at this time, we can still take a look at what the top 8 looked like and some of the deck lists from that event. So we've got Giovanni Sasso coming off of a second place finish at Joinville, now winning the entire event with, spoiler alert, basically the same deck, and we'll cover why it is slightly different here in just a minute. Miguel Angel Linares taking second place with Raging Bolt. Juan Andre Meja with Charizard Pidgeot. Nico Galaz with Dragapult Dusknoir. Raul Nash, Dragapult Pidgeot. Miguel Angel Rojas Duke with Gardevoir. Matias Serrano with Dragapult Dusknoir. And Andre Verreau with Dragapult Pidgeot. So we see Dragapult, fresh off of winning Dortmund, come in and take up half of the top 8 of this event. And then we also get to see 3 of the 8 decks have Dusknoir as a key featured Pokemon. I do believe, even though we don't have all of the list data for all of these, that Dusknoir actually comprised 6 of the decks, or a spot in 6 of the decks in this top 8 as well. John, do you have any big takeaways from the makeup of this top 8 before we really look at some of the deck lists?
Yeah, you kind of hit on what I was thinking of when I saw these results. I was like, wow, that's a lot of Dragapult. I mean, we just saw it do really well in Dortmund, and this just furthers that expectation that Ryuki list is going to
Yep.
pop up, but also people are going to stick to the Charizard build. We see both of them here in top 8. We have an even split, it looks like. Of 2 of the Charizard variant, or sorry, 2 of the Pidgeot variants and 2 of the Dusknoir variants. So that's pretty cool to see that there's like no right way to play it. I think players have their own preference with consistency versus power, and we're seeing that carried out here. And to me, I wrote down on my notes, this is the best finish for Raging Bolt since the start of this new format. This is the first time it's gotten into the finals of one of these major tournaments. And we see that it beat, I think it beat a Dragapult, right? In top 4.
No, I believe the top
Or
4
was,
game was
sorry.
Dragapult versus Terapagos, so he would have
Mm,
managed to somehow overcome Charizard, which I think is equally surprising. But I do believe that he defeated a Dragapult in top 8 because the Gardevoir played against one of the Dragapults in top 8 as well, I believe.
yeah, I don't know if his list ran Briar.
Well, we can
That'd
pull
be
that
one
up
thing I
real
would.
quick.
Yeah, let's take a look at it.
No.
So that makes it even more impressive that he beat Charizard in my mind.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing to
With
look at with this list is just you see a lot of consistency cards, which some people have been cutting down on in favor of cards like Briar, or just trying to add more power cards to their deck. 2 Ultra Ball is, surprisingly a high count of Ultra Ball in this deck nowadays, but just trying to streamline things, make your KOs come as fast and hard as possible. probably was just enough to kind of push people off the board in some of these matchups.
Yeah, no tools, no
Sure.
bravery charm, or no ancient booster capsule. So that's a little surprising, especially going into a meta that has more Dragapult. I feel like that's such a good card against Dragapult that I feel like that would be something I would want to include if I was playing Raging Bolt. But I get that, especially in Pokestop builds, you just the more games you get to play, the further in the tournament you go. And that's kind of the philosophy we see here. We see 2 energy retrieval and 1 superior energy retrieval. I think that's a little bit more energy recovery than I've seen in some lists. I've seen some playing 3 energy retrieval. I guess we had this player opting for the more powerful superior energy retrieval, which I can see the merits of. I think I saw him on stream. I watched, I think Azul did a restream of this tournament, and I watched pretty much most of what he showed. And yeah, that superior energy retrieval came up pretty big a couple times to get back grass energy to dig for Sada or for just like a prime catcher or something like that. So it's really nice to like kind of as this format progresses, we see just these deck changes. Nothing too drastic in this, I'd say. Opting not to play the Dusknoir, which makes sense if you're not playing Briar in my mind.
Sure.
Just focusing on a consistency, like you said.
Yeah, and I think that something we will get into in a little bit is whether or not we think this is the correct choice for this upcoming weekend as well. But before we really close out things on Lima, I do want to pull up and call out Giovanni Sasso's Galapagos list, which, if we look at everything, is only 1 card different from the list that he got second place in Joinville with last weekend. And the difference here is actually due to a deck list error. Giovanni accidentally submitted a list with 4 Buddy Buddy Poffin and 0 Briar, whereas last week he had 3 Buddy Buddy Poffin and 1 Briar. Otherwise, every single card is identical to the list that he played last week to that second place finish. Is this the best Galapagos list?
Yeah. I think we can safely say it's pretty close if it's not the best. One thing I wanted to point at before we move on was Nicolas Galas. He followed up a 9th place last week in Brazil with getting a 4th this week. And the cool thing was he switched from Terrapagos last week to Dragapult this week. And I think that's telling to me. It's saying, okay, top players are looking at Dragapult with clearer eyes now that we've had Ryuki win in Dortmund. And I think that's an important thing going into Louisville, for sure.
Absolutely. And I think that that's got to be probably something that was highlighted just in the composition of this top 8 overall, like we talked about before. If you don't see that result come in from Dortmund, I doubt that as many players play Dragapult and Lima, because I don't think if Dragapult was in a similar percentage to what it was at in Dortmund, I don't think 4 of them would have made top 8. The deck is obviously powerful. We've seen, I would wager to say, proof that the straight Dusknoir build is more powerful than the Pidgeot build, and yet we still see 2 of those Pidgeot builds here in top 8. So I do think that there may just be an overwhelming or higher meta percentage of Dragapult in this event, or, it could all be coincidence. Maybe they just hit the right matchups. It's hard to say when we don't really have that data available.
Yeah, we don't have the meta percentage for this, but I would imagine that it is a higher meta percentage for this tournament than it was for Dortmund by far. I don't think going into Dortmund it wasn't like a top 5 deck, and I think now we have to consider that it might be going into Louisville. Sure. But yeah, before we get into Louisville, we want to throw us to the next
Absolutely,
segment.
yeah. I didn't want to labor on this too long. I know that we did get some feedback last week. People thought that we talked a little bit too long about the results from the event. So, we appreciate that, though. If you are listening to the episode and you do have feedback for us, we would love to hear whatever it is. Please keep it coming. And so, John, I know that you wanted to give us an update on the CP leaderboard, and I believe you also had a special name in mind for this segment. So could you remind me what that was?
Yeah, sure. So reading up on the Battle Frontier, there's a section where you can see how well you rank amongst all the other trainers in the Frontier, and it's called the Ranking Hall. And I think that would be an apt name for this segment. Each week, I want to look at just the top 25 players for North America Maybe as we get further into the season, we start focusing on a global approach, looking at the different leaderboards all across the world. But this is still pretty early on, and I just kind of wanted to highlight what I've seen week to week, coming out of regionals and with locals, and then some international travels for some players, just to see what shapes up over the course of a week. And it's interesting, like stuff changes a little bit more than you think it would. I think a lot of players are like, oh, well, people might just take it easy after Baltimore. We have only 2 weekends between Baltimore and Louisville. I'm sure some players would just take it easy, and we saw some did, but a lot of players were out there at their locals at the very least. But we also saw a couple players travel internationally.
Sure.
And so I wanted to just take this segment to I've been tracking from, let's see, I think September. Let's go back to the front page. September 6th. So about a month now of rankings. Every week I'll write down the top 25, and it's fun. I like college football. It's fun to see the top 25 teams change from week to week. So this kind of reminds me of that with players. And it's fun to see who makes it into the top 125 and what's the benchmark. Where are we seeing that cutoff? So without further ado, let's get into it. So right now, number 1 overall, Rahul Reddy. He did really well in Baltimore. We saw with Lugia, and then followed it up with a Dortmund second finish. So he's at top with 765 championship points. And then there's a pretty steep fall off to Henry Chow, the first place player from Baltimore, with 473. And then there's a decent spread of players, most of everything. So just in my notes, 23 out of the 25 players coming into Baltimore played in Baltimore. Coming out of Baltimore, only 1 player in the top 25 stayed in the top 25 that did not have a finish in day 2. So if you look at the rankings before Baltimore, everybody that was in the top 25 had a finish in Baltimore, and only 1 player, who I think was ranked 3rd, stayed in the top 25. So I think that really just highlights the importance of major events. That shouldn't be anything too shocking to any long-term competitive players, but yeah, just regionals mean more this season than ever before, as we look at trying to hit your best finish limits and do really well and have those kind of spike finishes of top 8 and whatnot.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Some players were busy in the 2 weeks between Baltimore and Louisville. We obviously talked about Rule earlier. Samuel, I can't say it. I'm sorry if I pronounced your last name wrong. Samuel Schmie, Scime, rose 12 places from to 9th place after he got top 128 in Dortmund. So he had a Canadian player travel over to Dortmund, and he did fairly well. And then locally, a lot of players competed very well. We had Kieran Farah, who finished in the finals of Baltimore with Lugia. He had a cup win with Terrapagos to move from 8th to 5th in the week after Baltimore. He and Rob won a cup with Charizard 2 weeks ago to crack the top 10. And then I also saw over the weekend, this past weekend, he switched up games and played in a Magic the Gathering regionals and finished in the top 8 of that, which was pretty cool. He got $4,000 and a Pro Tour invite for that. So
it would have been really funny to see him win that event, so we could finally put to bed the which game is more difficult discussion. But
for sure,
unfortunately, Ian let all of us down.
We had Michael Davidson, who had a good Worlds finish. He moved up a good bit to climb to 17th. He won 2 cups, not last weekend, but the weekend before, playing Guardy instead of Reggie Drago, which I thought was interesting. So a little different. He's kind of the pioneer. Played Reggie Drago at Worlds. I think he played it at Baltimore, and so it was interesting to see him switch up decks. Steven Varesco has only played 2 events. And out of those 2 events, the worst finish he had was a top 4. So he had top 4 in Baltimore, and then he had a top 4 in his cup he played in 2 weeks ago. So that's pretty impressive. I'm looking at all the other players. They've played way more than that that are in the top 25 right now. So it's kind of cool to see that. I know he's, not able to travel as much as some of these players. But yeah, it's really cool to see him just capitalize on the small experiences he does get to participate in.
Well, like you said, with Steven, and then also obviously with Raul and Henry, with Henry Chow, Raul, and Steven's placements, the importance of making a high level finish at a major event is really highlighted in the fact that all three of them are either the top 2 placements at the leaderboard, or, like you said, with a limited number of events played, still able to be in the top 25. Not even just 125, top 25. So Steven's got a good bit of ground up over several people right now.
I mean, it's obviously still early. I know this is all kind of just
Sure.
speculative, but it's still interesting to see like who's traveling for. I mean, we've had Pokemon players travel internationally for regionals and special events, and just kind of to prove that point, the last player I want to talk about, Zach Lesage, competed in Lima, Peru
Yep.
over the weekend, and I believe finished. It's tough because there wasn't a posted result, and I didn't see. He might have posted on Twitter. I should have looked at that. Shoot. But he at least finished in the top 32. I think he was in a winning end for the last round. Oh no, he finished in top 16. I'm looking at it right now. So that's very cool. So with that, he's definitely in the top 10 of the leaderboard right now. So my rankings will have to get changed a little bit, but Pokemon hasn't updated it. I don't know if the organizer has not submitted the championship points for that event. So
Zach did not attend Baltimore, I believe, because I believe he and his wife welcomed a child that same weekend or very close to it. But so congrats to them. But I believe Zach's also been grinding locals pretty heavily if he's still within that range of points, right? So would we expect his position to stay fairly static from here on out as far as point total is concerned, unless he's able to keep those high-level finishes flowing at major events?
He gets a good amount for the top
Sure.
16. Yeah, it's tough to say. That'll be really something we watch as we go on with the season. After, I mean, you have the guaranteed win. If you win at regionals, you obviously get the guaranteed Worlds invite. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's hard to say. I think it's a little too early to answer that question.
Totally fair.
But yeah, it's definitely interested to see what happens, how it shakes out. And I think moving forward, I'll try to get better with the graphics on that segment, so we got like an actual top 25 list, and then I'll write down like who left out, who dropped out of the top 25, that kind of thing. So yeah, still workshopping that, but yeah, bear with us when we have our little growing pains.
So John, thank you again for the ranking hall discussion. And now we're going to move on, and John is going to highlight a deck for us in the retro format of his choice in this section that we call Time Capsule. John, take it away again.
Yeah, sure. So another thing I've been doing this week in the preparation for Louisville, I'm judging the regionals this coming weekend. I'll be driving up Friday and staying up. So if you guys see me at the regionals, I'll try to have my friendly judge face on, not just my judge face, but my friendly judge
Everyone
face.
hates when people have resting judge face.
I know, it's tough. Like, I'm in the zone. I'm actively judging. So it could be tough to not always just have that going. But I wanted to talk about another thing that's going on that weekend is there's a Sun and Moon through Lost Thunder tournament going on. Simon Beauchard is hosting that on Sunday morning. So I think it's up on Limitless, playlimitless.tcg if you guys are interested in looking into registering for that. So I'll be playing in that. I'm not too familiar with this format. I did play a lot of Sun and Moon through Cosmic Eclipse. I think the one right before Lost Thunder, but there wasn't a regionals I could go to for this, so I definitely had to learn a little bit and kind of have a refresher on this. But I was just like looking over all the different deck lists. There was about 8 or 9 events that occurred during this format. We had the LAIC, and then we only had one North American. Well, I shouldn't say North American. One American regionals. There was a special event in Mexico City for this format, but the big event outside of LAIC was Roanoke, Virginia regionals. And this deck, it is Gardevoir, Swampert, Ninetales took that down, and that was piloted by Jimmy Pendarvis, and played this list to a first place at Roanoke. And interestingly enough, it wasn't just him playing this. We had Azul, who got 23rd in the event, and Michael Pramawat played the same list with a couple cards different. And then Isaiah Williams also played this at Roanoke. And they all had top. I think Michael Pramawat got 40th, and Isaiah, I think, got top 128 in this event. And just looking at it, it's so convoluted compared to so many decks we see nowadays. You have the potential to get 3 different types of stage 2 attackers, and you can attack with all of them with different factors that are going for them in this. It's such an interesting thing to see, attacking stage 2s, and we don't really see that too often in this format. We have the Dragapult, obviously, but that's been kind of the exception to the rule in this format. And this wasn't too common in this format. I'd say that Zoroark GX was the big bad of this format. And so players were having to deal with that. And players did deal with that. Gardevoir has dark resistance and has a lot of hit points and can attack for just the one fairy energy. So you can just hit into two-shotting the Zoroark with Choice Belt, and then once you do get hit back, you can Max Potion and remove this fairy energy and kind of reattach another one and keep going at it. Gardevoir, let's see, has a really good ability, Secret Spring, that allows you to, once during your turn, attach a fairy energy from your hand to that Pokemon, and then so you can have supplemental attachments. And so by itself, it was a very powerful attacker, but it wasn't always consistent. That's why you have the Swampert here that allows you to discard a card from your hand and draw 3 cards, kind of like Trade or Refinement, but getting 3 cards instead of 2 cards. And the glue that holds it all together is this Ninetales GX that has an ability that when you evolve it, you're able to get 2 item cards. So you can get your rare candies, you can get your Timer Ball, which some players have very strong opinions about. Get your Ultra Balls and whatnot from the deck to kind of get your stage 2 lines going. The one thing that is very interesting is the inclusion of Solgaleo GX. It seems weird and counterintuitive to run a metal type attacker in this. You don't run any metal energy, but you don't need any metal energy with its attack. It takes 2 colorless, it does 120, and then it accelerates energy from your discard pile to your bench Pokemon. And it also has a really powerful ability for the mirror match. You're hitting for weakness on your opponent's Guardi EXs, but they cannot use their own Solgaleos if you have your Solgaleo in place, because its ability does shut off weaknesses for all your Pokemon. So that is a very powerful thing to have in this format. There wasn't a huge contingency of metal attackers, but there was enough to where it's a nice thing to have. Gardevoir GX is such a tanky attacker in this format, so it can be so hard to knock out. We see a Ditto, which I think was pretty much an auto-include in every list in this format, that had a really cool ability that allows you to just basically evolve it into any stage 1 that you have in your hand. And beyond that, the only other things I think are very interesting are the Super Boost Energy, which was a special Prism Star card that when you have when it's attached to stage 2s, it provides 1, like a rainbow energy, essentially, 1 of any energy type. But if you have 3 or more stage 2s in place, it provides 4 of any energy type. So obviously with Gardevoir, you're able to do a lot of damage, but you're also able to use Swampert, who had a Hydro Pump attack that hit for it hit 60 base, I think, and hit for 20 more damage for each water energy you have in play. So we get to kind of use that really, really effectively.
The cool thing looking at this is that if you compare it to, well, one, I'll say I think it's really funny that there's a Gardevoir deck that has a Trade-esque ability in it still, or a Refinement-esque ability, like you said. We also see an ability that's identical, or nearly identical, since we did not have Terra Pokemon back then, but nearly identical to Noctowl's Jewel Seeker ability in the deck. Just a consistency ability on top of the Beacon attack from that Alolan Vulpix basic that would let you search your deck for 2 Pokemon. We see the ever-present Tapu Lele GX in these formats. I mean, ever since it was printed, it was at least a 1 of in every single deck, just to fetch supporter cards and give you that consistency you needed. The really cool thing that I think though, that I enjoyed about these GX formats for the limited amount of time that I was able to play them online was that you had the GX attacks, similar to modern V-Star powers, just once per game powerhouse things that you could do, but it wasn't always just one thing in your deck. And there were definitely situations where each of these things could come up and be potentially viable. And it may be matchup specific, it may be situation specific, but all of them may see use throughout a tournament run. And I think that that's something that we don't, unfortunately, get to experience with V-Star powers, where every deck that has a V-Star power has one designated V-Star power, and that's the thing they do every game.
Mm-hmm. Or even, with Terrapagos doesn't even have a V-Star power. But yeah, you definitely bring up a good point. I mean, Ninetales GX is a good example of that. It says if your opponent's Pokemon is an Ultra Beast Pokemon, you are able to just knock it out. Like, it's the effect of the attack is just you're knocked out, which was really powerful with this format. Blacephalon GX was a huge player in this format with just the kind of powerful discarding or putting energy in the lost zone and hitting for gobs of damage. It was nice to have an answer in your Ninetales. But yeah, I think in this format, versatility is key, but consistency. Like, one thing after I played a couple games with this format, the supporters are really, really underpowered.
Okay.
You have Cynthia and you have a Lily here, and that's your only draw supporters. You have 4 draw supporters, and that's it. And so, like, after turn one you want an Elms. Turn 2, you probably want a Cynthia. And then after that, you're just using your swamp arts to draw. And that was your strategy. So much of this format is board-based draw. You have a lot of Instructor and Guru. You have the GX Zoroark that we talked about earlier with Trade. And then you have Macargo with Smooth Over. That should be familiar with you. I guess you're... but... yeah, it's a very different format, a little bit slower, still had a lot of powerful attacks and powerful turns that can take your breath away if you're not prepared for it. If you get like 2 Gardevoir out, you can go, attach Super Boost Energy, go Secret Spring, and attack, so you're hitting for, with 6 damage, you're doing quite a bit of damage. I can't do the math off the top of my head. I'll come back to me on that.
Is Gardevoir just 30 times?
Yeah, I think it is 30 times. Let me double check.
You could very easily get up to 180, and then if you get another turn of that, you're hitting that 210 to 240 range where you're one-hit KOing these Stage 2 GX Pokemon and really getting ahead in your prize race.
Yeah, it is 30 times. This deck has that potential to reach and get knockouts, but it also has these max potions that are able to stay the course and just keep you from getting, kind of run off the board. You can just stick a big Guardy in the active while you're not really drawing well, and then try to get your board set up more and more to where you get to those powerful turns. But yeah, I'm looking forward to playing in this Sun and Moon Lost Thunder tournament. And yeah, I was definitely thinking about this list a lot as I'm getting ready for this. So I wanted to share it with you guys today.
For anyone that is attending that happens to listen to the episode prior to this happening, do you know, will anyone have decks available for people that may not have cards for this format to borrow?
Yeah, I'm sure that people are going to bring their whole retro collection. Sun Moon 3 Lost Thunder is pretty popular. I know I'll bring a couple extra decks. And that's the great thing about the Pokemon community is if you're a new player that doesn't really have a lot of experience playing these formats, people are more than willing to share and help you learn. And I'm sure, like, if you show up at this event, somebody will let you borrow a deck. Don't, as long as you're nice and don't, riffle shuffle people's cards if they don't want you to. You should be able to borrow a deck for this.
So be sure to hit up Limitless. We'll give you all of the information that you need for this Sun and Moon to Lost Thunder event if you're interested and are attending the Louisville Regional this weekend. So with that being said, we're going to transition into the final main topic that we have for this episode and talk about our expectations for Louisville. I unfortunately am not going to be attending this weekend. I'll just be a spectator, assuming that I have power and internet. But I know John will be our boots on the ground on the judging side of things, and we'll be sure to hit him up next week for everything that he experienced live and in person at the event. But we wanted to discuss what we think is going to happen heading into this event now that we've seen 2 regionals and a special event, 3 major events in this format. Nothing is brand new anymore. all of the secret decks of the world are likely revealed. People have seen these, quote unquote, ideal 60s for the opening of the format and maybe refined them slightly heading into the event. And so, John, I wanted to first ask you, what do you expect the top 5 decks to be heading into this event, as far as play rate is concerned?
Sure. I think Raging Bolt will still be number one moving into this tournament. It seems to be the choice for a lot of players that don't have a lot of experience or don't feel confident with any one deck in particular. They kind of gravitate towards the one-shot potential, just the raw power of Raging Bolt. Beyond that, it gets a little harder, but I think we'll see Dragapult make a big showing. I'd expect that Dortmund list to be pretty popular, but also the Pidgeot variant, like we talked about. And then I would say it gets a little tough. I'd say Drago should be in the top 5. I think Terrapagos is definitely there. I would say Lugia should be in the top 5. Even though we have seen the play rate go down a lot. I think a lot of players that don't want to play Raging Bolt but want to have that like really high power level might play Lugia. And beyond that, I don't really know. I'm trying to think.
So would you say that the order that you listed those in, so Bolt, Pult, Regidrago, Terrapagos, Lugia?
Oh, Charizard would be my last bit. Sorry for the top 5, and just the order of play. That was all just listed off the top of my head. So I would say Bolt, Pult, probably Drago, Charizard, Lugia would be my top 5.
So you still don't think Terrapagos is going to make it into the top 5 of the event?
Oh, I'm so. I definitely do. I think I said that
you
originally.
You did, but then you gave me
not?
Charizard as the 6th one,
Yeah.
and it gets tough. It gets tough. There are a lot of these are, that's the weird thing.
I should have wrote
That's
this
the weird
down.
thing with having such a wide format. You have so many decks that are viable, and it makes it really difficult to decide. What do you think the top 5 decks are going to be? So I'm gonna we'll hit this one more time. Let me lock in. What are your top 5 most played decks for this event?
Bolt, and I think Terrapagos will be second. Then Dragapult. Then what did I just say? Charizard, and I would say Regidrago will be a little bit above Lugia, but it'll be kind of right there. That's where I think I'm at.
You and I are in pretty similar places. I too think that Raging Bolt is going to be the most played deck this weekend. I think that it's still seeing enough success that people want to stick with it. It's relatively straightforward. It lets people feel powerful and do powerful things. It's also probably going to garner a little bit more attention from, the quote unquote upper echelon of players than it otherwise has recently, because a lot more people are becoming more comfortable with the format. A lot of these other decks are now recognizing that they want to go first every game, and Bolt is a deck that naturally wants to go second. And so if you are comfortable winning the flip and going second, or losing the flip and going second, you're probably in a pretty good spot. The scary thing that a lot of people, tend to shy away from is they don't like that the deck is so linear. It doesn't really have the options. But I still think the deck is probably going to end up being a total of, 15 or even, again, 17% heading into day one. In second place, I actually had Charizard. I think you're going to see a lot of diehard Charizard players. We'll see some adjustments. I know Gabe Smart made a little bit of an adjustment in Dortmund with the increase in nest ball count to try to make that deck more comfortable going first, just because so many other decks do want to go first in the format. If you want your Charizard deck to be viable, you need to be able to operate going first. And, we could see some of these higher nest ball Zard variants come out. And I had Zard sitting around probably the 14% mark. I was going to see a pretty big increase in my mind of Terrapagos. We had the results from Joinville, the results from Lima. I know Tord did a masterclass this week. I believe Rowan Stavenow also did a masterclass this week. And so I think that Terrapagos is going to jump way up to probably right under Charizard. So I had Charizard at 14. I think Terrapagos is going to sit at 13% in day one. And it's going to convert fairly well, in my opinion. I mean, obviously we'll have to see who's playing it. I think that's going to play a pretty big factor into things. But it's a really, really strong deck. If you hit the right cards, you're going first. you're going to win most of your games. Following that, I had Dragapult in third. I think that the results from Dortmund are going to carry a lot of weight. Seeing half of top 8 in Lima being Dragapult is also going to carry a lot of weight. Dragapult will sit probably around 10%, maybe a little bit higher. And then rounding out my top 5, I think Lugia is going to get a little bit of a bump. It's still going to be sub 10% play rate. I have it sitting at around 7 or 8% right now. But I think that that's going to be enough to get it into that day 1 graphic on page 1. And then, like you said, best of the rest, I think that you and I just have Lugia and Regidrago flip-flopped. The V-Stars are obviously very powerful decks, but you can only so many people can play different decks. Regidrago has a lot of raw power, but I think that the results of Lugia are going to pull a lot of people back into it.
Yeah, in my mind, I think a lot of Drago players would probably shift to Dragapult. It has a lot of the same, like a lot of the times it feels like you're just playing Dragapult. Like that's how I think a lot of players' concession was before Stellar Crown. Dragapult or Regidrago felt like the best way to play Dragapult, and I don't think that's true anymore. And I think we're seeing like the definitive Ryuki list kind of come through and convince a lot of players that this is the definitive way to play Dragapult. So we might see a lot of the numbers from Regidrago move over to Dragapult.
Fair enough. Follow-up question now. Since neither of us are playing in this event, what if you were playing in the event, what deck would you bring to the tournament?
I'd definitely play Regidrago. Yeah. Or, sorry, I misspoke. I would have played Regidrago. I think I'd actually play Dragapult now that I've been playing Regidrago for a long time, and I think I would be that player that I just described. I think having that Dusknoir line and having that capability to soften up stuff so you can go 130, 200 just feels so clean right now. Knocking out Charizards, knocking out basically take your pick of anything in the format. Just it's so powerful having that. Like I think top players love, and I love just being able to manipulate all the little damage counters everywhere, knockout stuff. I'll miss Hawlucha, but I still think like with the Radiant Alakazam, you still get there a lot of the time, knocking out setups, destroying your opponent's Duskulls before they can evolve and destroy your bench setup. So I think that would probably just be my go-to pick for this weekend.
Well, as a longtime Regidrago player, first I wanted to ask you your opinion on a couple of card inclusions going into this event. Do you think that they should be playing Temple of Sinnoh this weekend? Should they respect the Lugia?
Yeah, I would.
Okay.
Yeah. There's enough missed energy just hanging around the Charizard lists, too, to really just kind of shore up that matchup.
Fair enough. Next, should they include Noivern EX as one of their discard options?
So, like, in my mind, if I'm playing Noivern, I have to retool my whole deck to prevent too wide of a bench to where my opponent can just pick around it. And I don't, my gut is like Noivern seems so good in paper. I want it to be good, Aaron, but it just doesn't feel good, especially against Raging Bolt. Like against Terapagos, maybe. I haven't really tested that matchup with Noivern. Last week after Dortmund, I'm like, oh, I really want to try Noivern out again. And I built a list with Scoop Up Cyclone with, I think I ran Turo. It ran Noivern, and it ran just like trying to get that Noivern out as fast as possible. And it just didn't feel as convincing as I wanted it to, especially in the Raging Bolt matchup. It just felt like they were just able to outspeed you. Especially, it feels like when you're adding Noivern, you're cutting into your consistency cards. You're not as efficient at getting that turn 2 attack. And playing only one Noivern, it's kind of difficult to get out, get in your discard pile, and use turn 2. So I would probably not play it just because I feel like it takes away from the strength of the decks, which is just the consistency of using Dragapult turn 2 and moving forward.
Okay, fair enough.
And just lean on Radiant Zard for the Raging Bolt matchup.
Sure. Like you said, there's definitely even if you are able to get off the other attack against Terapagos, they do still have counterplay. They can set up a Dusknoir play that makes things very awkward for you. But, I think that the argument in favor of the Noivern is that you do sometimes just need that kind of one turn to slow them down, to force them into a position where they would have to pop 2 or 3 Dusknoirs to really do something to you. and I think that might make it worthwhile, but tough to say. Third and final question for Regidrago inclusion. Do you include canceling Cologne this week?
Ooh, I don't think I do. I think you might get burned by it if you hit a control or hit the one player playing Manaphy, but everybody's cutting Manaphy right now. Cornerstone Seal would be annoying to hit, but you have ways to deal with it outside of canceling Cologne. I don't think it's as necessary as it was at the start of the format or the end of the last format. So yeah, I probably wouldn't run it.
The reason I had asked about that card was because I think that there's a decent chance that we'll see an uptick in Ironthorn's presence. Not huge by any means, but enough that it could merit concern for these Regidrago players. The matchup is still not totally unwinnable without your abilities, but it is much more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And even that canceling Cologne doesn't automatically make you win either. You still have to find the card, obviously. But it's just a very powerful card when you are able to get it pulled off. But sure, there you have it. John's thoughts are we ship Sinnoh, we leave Noivern in the binder, and we rip all of our canceling Colognes in half because they don't matter.
I wouldn't go. You're just giving me the hot takes. I think going back to Sinnoh real quick, you just need a counter stadium to the Area Zero underdepths and to basically just that. And Sinnoh just provides the best answer for that, I think, at this point. I think jamming tower is not bad either if you're thinking about another inclusion that helps sometimes against Raging Bolt. Or if Terapagos runs the Bravery Charm, it helps in that matchup too. But I think just it's so good to have the ability to discard that Area Zero Underdepths, then play Iono, and then destroy their only attacker, and you're like, okay, what are you gonna do? Can you knock out my one big? Because it forces the question. I think there's forcing your opponent to have to recover their board state is a huge factor. Again, that in that matchup, so it's not just for Lugia.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, like you said, that's the thing that I think makes it easier to merit including the card is that it is more versatile than just kind of a silver bullet tech card for sure. Like you alluded to before, my answer is probably not going to surprise anybody that knows me or anybody that I've discussed the game with in the past month. I still think Palkia Dust Noir is extremely powerful. I obviously do not think that the deck is going to be widely played going into this weekend, even though we have seen several people post wins at Cups with it since Dortmund happened. And I think that the deck is relatively well positioned in the meta, given that I feel like it is strong into Terapagos. The matchup's a little weird just because a lot of it depends on who goes first. But you do have the ability to win going second, unless your opponent can pop multiple Duskulls into Dust Noirs on turn 2. So when you hit the Terapagos player that absolutely has the nuts, they're probably going to win, but I think that happens to literally any deck they sit across from.
Yeah.
And if that doesn't happen to you on the Palkia side of things, you still have the tools to be able to combat them. And I think that I would rather play Palkia into Terapagos than playing a Terapagos mirror. Also, to add to that, I think that the deck is very strong into any other evolving deck that we're seeing in the meta. The Charizards, the Dragapults, the Gardevoirs, things that all comprise the top 8 of this event last week in Lima, all have the potential to be absolutely board wiped on turn 2 if you go first. And that's something that I've always held as one of the main kind of pillars of the deck and how it is able to maintain the level of power that a lot of other decks can't really reach, just because you can pretty easily take 3+ knockouts on turn 2, especially if your opponent is playing a deck that has actual basics in it rather than just 2 prizers. I still think the deck is going to be really fringe. A lot of it can, unfortunately, depend on how kind your Pokestop spins are to you. That's not to say that anybody that runs absolutely horribly can't win games with the deck, but if somebody pulls up with this deck and runs hot, they are pretty close to unstoppable. And I think that we'll see at least one of them make it into the top 8 again this week.
Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked by that. I think. How do you think your Raging Bolt matchup looks going into the weekend? You said it's a top deck that you're having to play against.
I think that it's still very much so a winnable matchup. Raging Bolt does not attack turn 1 every single game, and even when they do attack, they don't always like for them to win the matchup easily. They have to be able to not only attack on turn one, but they also have to hit you with a gust to take 2 prizes on turn one. So if you can force them onto an odd prize map, a lot of times you come out winning. And if they don't attack on turn one, you say same story. You end up ahead in that instance. And in a lot of those cases, you can just kind of make yourself a beat stick board and swing in with Palkias, or go just fight with your Terra Greninja EX and put them in positions where they either are just trading 2 for 2 with you, and if you take the first 2 prizes, you win the game, or you can set up a board where you can Dust Noir a Raging Bolt that doesn't have a tool on it, or you vacuum the tool off, and Mirage Barrage their Pheasantipity that you counter or Prime Catcher to push into the active, hit it for 240 because it's fighting, snipe that Raging Bolt, you take 4 prizes in 1 turn. And the fact that you can take multiple prizes in a single turn, or multiple KOs, I should say, and that's something that they can't do from their side of the board, make it to where that matchup can be scary, but I think that it is still overall favorable.
Yeah, I definitely can see what you're saying. You have a lot of lines that they just don't have. It's such a linear, like Raging Bolt's such a linear deck. I think that's why a lot of top players don't play it. It's not because, I mean, anybody can see that deck and say the power level is insane, right? You can basically hit for unlimited damage. But it's so linear. Like we've seen some players include Dustnor, but in Briar to just trying to give it some more tools to deal with all these problems. But yeah, just having the Palkia. Actually, the Greninja I think is such a good card in this meta.
Absolutely.
Moving into this weekend, and I think we might even see. I wouldn't be shocked to see like a Greninja deck. Not necessarily just Greninja, but like other decks that might start featuring Greninja if they can too. That'd be pretty cool.
I've tried. I've actually put a decent amount of effort into making a straight Greninja deck, and it struggles into some of the other evolving matchups. Even though you can still include the Palkia, it's not as consistent in getting it, because when you are heavier on Greninja, you're not getting Dusknoir out as often because you're having to include other cards that it just muddles things up a little bit. But I have seen talk of people trying to increase the thickness of the Greninja line in Palkia Dusknoir, and that's something that I personally haven't tried, but I think it could be really interesting to actually potentially threaten your opponent with 2 Greninjas in a single game.
Yeah, I don't know if Terapagos can deal with
that. I don't think it can.
Two Greninjas, no. Yeah, and then it helps in other matchups. Like you talked about Iron Thorns. Sure. Greninja just smacks that around. And like Miraidon, obviously, helps cover that a lot. So yeah, I can see like 2 Greninjas being a decent include for this weekend.
Yeah, the big problem that you run into there is just finding space. I mean, the deck is very tight as it is, and I think justifying getting rid of 2 cards to add 2 cards that are not consistency cards is a big ask. But if somebody can make it work, like I said, if you run hot with a deck, you're going to win your games. There's no doubt about that. But I think that covers just about everything that we had for this week. John, did you have any final thoughts before we close out?
No, I think I'm good. Yeah, I'm excited to see how the metagame evolves going into this tournament. We always make our predictions. We always say, oh, I think this deck will do well or that deck will do well. And then, like, Cloth gets a top 4 or, like, Miraidon makes a deep run or something that we didn't even think of. Like, Banette could come back and do well. I mean, we're still in a format where, like, somebody could make a Klefki deck, and I wouldn't be surprised, Like, they just find a way to abuse Klefki, switch it out of the active, like, I don't know, use Radiant, like, or Alakazam EX or something crazy. You never know. And that's the cool thing about Pokemon. And I'm excited to see it, and I'm excited to talk about it with you. So, yeah, great.
Yeah, so if you have your Klefki deck, please send it to us. I know that card is broken. I talked about it last week, and I'm just waiting for somebody to break it. But that being said, we're going to shut things down here. We thank you again for listening to this episode, and we'll see you next time on the Battle Frontier.